Heroes typically were the firstborn, which technically I was in my parents' marriage. You were typically the golden child, which I was, right? I mean, I could do wrong.
So I love living life in the light because you just can't hide stuff in the light. And I don't want to hide stuff in life because it just equates to badness.
I did that inside the real estate business. I did it in my family. I was always trying to save. Like, I was running around with a cape on my back playing hero.
Hey, what's up? Welcome to the Real Rehab Experience. My name is Garret Thor Belcetus, and I am here with the other host of the show, Steve D. Valentine.
What's up, Thor?
Steve, what up? This whole first experience is probably the catalyst to what we're doing now.
Yep.
And it's storytelling, right? It's sharing experiences and more so probably the lessons that have come from it. So why don't you tell everyone what we're going to get into today?
Yeah, I think last night, I was thinking about doing this interview this morning and having the conversation about it. Was the visualization of this is for any man or woman that was in the same spot I was over the last couple of years where, my success had led to a lot of drinking, and I had to make the decision, right? It wasn't an ultimatum with my family. It was a choice. And that was kind of where my wife laid it out, is like, you either need to choose to get better or you need to choose to just stay that way. And one way has these consequences and the other way has those consequences. It's ultimately your choice, right? And I know that a lot of men and women get into that position where there's an ultimatum to make a decision and then they end up in prison.
All right, so I feel like the last year we have been talking about different types of rehab, right? This catalysted so many conversations for us and us between other people even. And we've met people that have had to rehab a business, had to rehab a knee injury, had to rehab a marriage or their own personal life. At some point, life put them down low into some hole and they've had to find strength to climb out.
Also, the interesting part is that the word rehab before last year was always referred to in real estate. What are we rehabbing in houses? What are we tearing down to the studs to build new?
Yeah.
And then same thing, rehabbing. It's like everything comes into the analogy of it, right? When you look at the Blazer, it was rehabbed. We took it in, we tore it down all the way to the frame and rebuilt it top to bottom. And I think that was what has gone through in the last year.
I just don't think I say either of us as if the Blazer was mine, but I just don't think either of us or you expected the Blazer build to become such a spiritual experience.
Dude, it's you look at God's timing and God things and all the stuff, and you look at that truck, and it is a special truck as it goes all the way back to my teenage years, and now being able to afford to have one and going through that process of building it and then realizing it's such a funny thing where the arm sleeve that I have on my left arm, where it started to be this American Motorhead tattoo that eventually got tweaked into the vision of what we're working on now. So it's the Blazer, I never knew it would be that sentimental when it came down to it, but it represents a lot.
Yeah, man. All right. Well, let's dive into this, because this whole episode is kind of the journey that got us started into this experience, and probably what people are going to discover are our ongoing conversations with other people. And some of them, again, will be with an entrepreneur about their business, or someone who's gone through a personal rehab, or it's kind of all over. But hopefully, they're all very.
I think it's important to say this too, is that I'm not going to spend an hour telling you about all the things that I fucked up in life. I saw that in a lot of meetings and a lot of different things where guys would come in and they would speak to all the things they screwed up and speak very little into the changes that they made to continue the journey to not drink. And so I want to make sure to be really clear, like these are going to be really practical, tactical things that I want to share as we go through this conversation from my journey. It's been about 14 months as we're doing this interview, from the time I walked into that place thinking that, well, life is freaking over and it's going to implode. And the reality is it was a decision that I had not made. I wouldn't be where I'm at today, and I'm very grateful for it.
And that's because an hour is not enough time, right? To talk about all
an hour is not enough time. Exactly.
Well, man, so let's go back to September of 2023. Because I feel like you were on this verge and this.
I thought we had the conversation that September, like we canceled September, like from here till hell freezes over. Like there's no more Septembers. The reason September is just such a crazy, in our family is that number one, 9 years ago, it was the month that my dad died, right on his 40th wedding anniversary. It's also a month that's a reminder of when Wendy and I had some severe problems in our marriage, and we separated, and I lived apart from her and my family for 3 months, and then the following September, again, my wife made a call. We had a huge blowout on Labor Day weekend, and Labor Day weekend's always around my dad's death, and so I've dealt with all those things. And she called. She said,
Up to that point, how did you deal with them?
"Oh, I drank."
No, just checking.
Just to be sure.
Yeah.
And so what ended up happening was Wendy called and she's like, "Hey, I've decided, the family's decided that you're not allowed to go on the family cruise in September with us. And you need to take some time to figure your shit out and go through the process and make some decisions." It wasn't a cold-hearted wife conversation. It was, Wendy went through a lot of coaching and a lot of therapy, after our marriage struggles, and she was trying to figure out her identity. And it was a very loving, respectful way of saying, "Hey, you have a fork in the road right now that you need to choose, and I'm not choosing it for you. So here's the time and the space that you need to make some decisions."
Yeah.
That was hard.
Yeah. Well, clear as day. So that was great. We all went to Alaska without you. I made it on that. I made it on the family cruise.
Screw you.
But also then we came back and you decided, boom, right away, you went to rehab, and it was a great experience right off the bat. Actually, tell me about your first rehab experience.
Dude. So during that 2 weeks that everybody was gone, I had really hard conversations with friends. I really broke things down and finally made a decision. I had reached out to a friend that had done rehab for opiates, and she recommended this place. So I didn't do any more research than that. By the way, if you're going to go to rehab, do some research, because we all need different things for what we're experiencing. And the first rehab experience, I remember I set everything up financially so I could be gone for 30 days. All the bills were paid. The business was taken care of. And I didn't know what was going to happen, right? I had to just trust in God and have faith that my staff, my wife, everybody could handle what was going on. And I walked away from a very, influential real estate practice that was going all over the place. And we were fighting a lot of fires at the time, right? Yeah. This is 23. The market's on the verge of all kinds of chaos and shit. And so now you go into that first experience where everything's set up. I'm nervous. I want to throw up as we drive to Fountain Hills to admit myself into this rehab facility, which no phone, no laptop, complete disconnect for 30 days, which was another get prepared for. I don't think I'd ever done that in my life where I just went stone cold silent.
Bro, I would venture to say that anybody listening to this podcast probably has not done that either. They've not put their phone down for a week.
Yep. And, well, I'm still here. The business is still there, so it worked, right? That first rehab experience, though, real simply, I walked in, I went into a couple of the meetings. They were terrible. I'm sure that they're good for some, but, I'm in my 40s. I have a family. I'm dealing with severe stuff going on in my life. And I don't want to use the word trauma because that's not really what it was. I really need to uncover some things and figure out how to deal with them. And I wasn't going to get the treatment or the conversations or the help that I needed in that place. And so anybody that signed up for coaching or any of those things, you got to realize obligation creates resentment. And so when I sat there, in the first 4 hours and said, you know what, if I'm really committed to this, I need to go to a place that's really going to help me, and this isn't going to be it. And I knew it in the first 4 hours. So the director of the rehab facility wouldn't let me use the phone. It was kind of like entrapment. They're like, "Oh, sorry, somebody else has to approve that." I'm like, "Well, get the person on the phone that can approve it." "Well, sorry, they're in a meeting for the next 4 hours." I'm like, God, it sounds like my staff trying to protect me. So I'm like, cool. So I left. Well, leaving meant I took my suitcase for 30 days and my briefcase, which really didn't have anything in it, but it did have a credit card and ID. And I walked down the main drag in Fountain Hills until I found a cell phone place. So I found a T-Mobile. I bought a phone. And I signed a new contract. I spent $95 on a phone, and I had to get a Samsung phone, so I had to get an Android phone because I'm going to buy another Apple phone. And you got to figure out how to operate that damn thing. You're like, God, how does this work? And so as I walked back to where the recovery center was, I was so frustrated and so defeated. I downloaded an Uber app, ordered an Uber, text a friend of mine, Tracy O'Malley, and said, hey, what was the place that you recommended to me a couple of years ago? And she sent it right back, and it was Soberman's Estates in Cave Creek. And all I remember about when I talked to the owner of that 3 years ago is an executive men's retreat. It was for and created for business professionals. And I'm like, all right. It was also twice as much money. Yeah. So, you talk about the amount of money I've invested in masterminds and courses and people over my lifetime. This was by far the best return on life and investment that I've ever made. And so I go back to the recovery center, and underneath the strip mall is a bar. So I knock back 2 double vodka sodas, I get in my Uber, and I get on the phone with the intake person for the next rehab.
Dude, so I remember that day because I think you called me, and you were actually on your way. Did you come back home?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think you were on your way back home.
Yep.
But then someone else was calling you, like, hey, I'll call you back, and then I'm going to head to this other...
That bee just got roasted.
That bee just flew and got burned. He's like, I'm out of here. You were coming back home, and you were like, hey, change of plan. I'm changing what I'm doing. Oh, hold on, I'll call you right back. And then I didn't hear from you for 30 days. and I was like, at first I was like, oh, this is interesting, right? So maybe someone's listening to this that isn't someone who has themselves been an addict, but maybe been impacted by it by a family member, right, or someone close to them, is going, what's the best way and avenue for me to support Steve right now? Is it to call Steve out? Is he quitting? Is this going to be an excuse? Is he not actually going to go somewhere after this? What am I supposed to say in this moment to, one, be supportive, be helpful, because this was a huge step that you took, but also you're already back home, like, but then you did, like,
dude, I was healed in 24 hours.
I was like, yeah, great,
I'm all good.
Yeah, that honestly in the moment was my fear of being like, he's just gonna try to shoulder this again.
So was Wendy, so was Tammy, so were the kids.
If anyone looks at our Real Rehab logo, there's a bunch of dates at the bottom, and then they're all crossed off with lines, because those are all the dates
that
you tried, and so I love it. But my favorite thing was then I couldn't get a hold of you because you actually made it to the other facility and checked yourself in, yep, and we're like, all right. And so I just was like, okay, see you on the other side, champ.
Right. Yeah, and then settling in, you go into that, you are nervous. You're still in the same city that you're kind of known, which is another thing, right? Shame, guilt, embarrassment. And it took me about 24 hours to settle in and look at everybody and go, I don't give a fuck what these people think. I need to sink into this, and I need to participate 100% in everything that is offered while I'm here. No missing class, no pretending to be sick, no missing therapy sessions, and be engaged, right? Because number one, I paid $50,000 for a 30-day vacation, and that was a huge investment. And there was no way that I was going to spend 30 days away from everything and that kind of money to go do it again. Like, this was kind of my final straw. Either this is going to break me or it's going to kill me, one of the two, right?
Yeah.
And the mindset for any of you that are struggling right now is really, it feels like a prison. And it feels like I have to do this rather than I get to do this. And I get to take this time, and I have the support mechanism to do it. And I think that is one of the differences that, when I went in of my own self-choosing, of my own choice, there was more support in what I was doing because I did make the choice.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't, even though people support when you're pushed into it, I also saw a lot of differences in the guys that were there to appease their family versus the guys that were there to dig in. And you can tell. And you can tell, like, it sucks to say, but you can tell when somebody's like, you're not done. You're not done. You haven't made a decision. You haven't gone through this process. And I don't think you can truly make that decision in rehab. I think a lot of us go to get sober or how to control our drinking so that we can still be social and do those things. And you quickly learn that, drinking wasn't really my issue. There was a lot of shit that I was covering up. And you start to sink into, what can I learn about myself in the next 30 days? What can I uncover? What can I repair? And what can I create?
So how did that impact your mindset? Like, how many days in did you start to go, I'm all the way here, I'm buying into every single thing, and also that you started to feel the hope of being able to turn a page?
Probably day 2. You got to remember, dude, for 25 years, I've been in the real estate space and I've gone from one thing to the next, evolution to evolution to evolution in the industry. We've changed, we've made a ton of money, we've lost a ton of money, we've built a huge influence. And then when you sit in it, you're like, God, what does it look like to take 30 days off? And it's kind of a forced decision. It wasn't a choice. I didn't set anything. I mean, it was a choice, but I didn't set up to go on this massive vacation.
Right, but do you feel like any part of you, I hadn't really thought of this till just now when you said that, is this was also not the first time you've hit a rock bottom?
No.
Like, you've overcome some major obstacles in life. You and Wendy have together, and for anyone who follows you knows different stories of going out on your own, getting $1 million in debt, climbing out of it, figuring it out.
Yep.
There's been a lot of obstacles that you've overcome. And do you feel like any of that paved the way for tenacity, going, I'm going to fight my way back? Like, that was able to be an inspiration and hope versus some people that are like, this is the end?
You know what's awesome as you say it? When you say it that way, it takes me back to an insane lesson from my dad when I was 12. And when I was 12 was when the drive for anything that I ever wanted was instilled. And it was a time my dad was a backwoods Tennessee kid, like grew up with an outhouse, all the things, poor as poor can be. And my dad fought and struggled like through all of it, right? Went into the Coast Guard, made it through that, got married twice, got divorced once, almost 3 times from my mom. But that lesson was, I wanted a pair of Air Jordans. My dad saw no value. Like, my dad was the frugal guy. We'd go to a restaurant and he'd be like, back in the day, it'd be like $10 for a hamburger. You know how many pounds of beef I can buy at the store? Like, that was always my dad and everything. But he said, if you want the Jordans, I'll show you how to get them, but you're going to have to work for them. If you want anything in life, this is what it requires. So my dad brought out 5,000 door hanger flyers. And he says, once this box is complete, you will have earned $100 that I will contribute $25 towards your Air Jordans, and then you can have Air Jordans. So if you truly want those, I'll give you the $25 to go buy a pair of shoes at Kmart, or you can do this work.
Yeah.
And so I got on my bike and I started delivering door hangers until they were all gone so I could go get a pair of Air Jordans. So you go back to the business. Failure's not an option. You keep trying until you figure it out. And it's a scary way to live because there's sometimes you take bigger risks knowing like, well, if it fails, I'll figure it out. I've done it before, right? Yeah. It's not going to kill me. And so being in rehab was kind of that moment that I had to choose. If the life I wanted and the success that I wanted, there's one thing holding me back, and it's the bottle. And if I can get rid of the bottle, what can I accomplish?
You're since Saving Private Ryan?
Mm-hmm.
It's that earn it mindset.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, even after the fact.
Yep.
That's great, but there have been a lot of prices paid for this, or not? And
100%.
Even when you were there in October, your family's back home. There's a lot of people waiting, a lot of people counting on you. And that is something I know a burden you have always carried. It just, even in your everyday life, in running a business, in employing people, in working with investors that trust you with their retirement, like, that's something you talk about often in carrying that pressure. Yeah. What do you feel like now, here we are 13, 14 months later, going, how has your, well, we'll get to identity, I think, but But what are you doing on a daily basis to navigate the tension of the anxiety that can come from that pressure? Because before it was drown it, right? And now it's every day is a battle of going, I got to
It's,
figure out a new way to.
you know what, it goes back to what I learned in that 30 days. And in that 30 days was one, I talked about create, right? So I wanted to create the habits that I never felt like I had time to create or the space to create. I go, okay, I'm going to start there, right? Which meant getting up every morning. And, you know, when before I went into rehab, you're watching all these guys, the cold plunges and things. And I'm like, okay, there's a pool here. So day 2, I was up at 4 a.m. I got in the freaking pool. It wasn't super cold, but it was cold enough. And a little scary, right? It's pitch black out. It's Cave Creek. There's no stars. There's no lights. You're just jumping in a cold pool that you have no idea what to expect.
Coyotes.
And then get out. I learned a mala bead exercise, which is just repeating your I am affirmations in the grass with your feet barefoot. I did some journaling, and then I hit the gym, and then I did a mile walk, and that was inside for breakfast by 7. Right? So that was my morning, and my morning was 100% selfish towards me. I wasn't thinking about business. Scary part was in 30 days, I never took my journal and wrote anything about work, ever. I just let it be. I didn't want to think about it. I only wanted to think about myself. And
Why do you preface that with scary thing?
because for anybody in the entrepreneur space, the all you know is work as a habit, that's a hard thing to control, to just put it down and not want to dive into something, not want to create something while you're there, not want to be. And what I was trying to do was quiet my mind from all the influence of social media, the comparison, where people are, all those pieces. But what I learned in those habits to absorb that anxiety of things was to learn to be quiet and be still, which the main 3 words that I learned there was pause, identify, respond, right? So many of us react to things instantly, and usually out of fear of the unknown, rather than pausing and thinking about what is happening internally, identifying how you're feeling, and then taking the time to actually respond to it or formulate a response. So the best example I have is, like, how many of us get a text message that, like, infuriates, like, it just rage, right? And we're like, da da da, fingers. All I think about when I say that is my brother, because Dan texts like furiously, right? And you're like, ah, or Tammy angry typing in the other room. And so you go through that process and you realize that if I would slow down, why am I angry at this text message? Is it because somebody else did something? Is it like, what's going on in my life that's creating this right now? Is it because I drank too much last night? Is it because I didn't work out this morning? Is it because I'm not eating right? There's all these pieces, and you start to realize that, man, if I can just pause for a minute, take some deep breaths, go for a walk, let it out, and then come back and respond to it rather than that knee-jerk reaction, has been a game changer for me.
Dang. Do you feel like, I'm going to go backwards for a second.
Okay.
Normally I don't do, but talking about it really being almost throwing you off that you weren't journaling about real estate. But do you feel like also for the first time, sitting in a moment of clarity, breaking it down to identity for the first time, you weren't going, your question wasn't, who am I without real estate? I think your question became, who would I become without my family? Like, that's what I'm at risk of losing. Because real estate, I feel like you've burned down and built back up and burned down and built back up, and you're fully capable of that. But I feel like this is the first time that you came face to face going into rehab being like, if I don't figure this out, there might not be a home to go back to.
There's 2 things there. You're right. The home to go back to, or is this where I take the time, I pause and figure out, like, is this what I still want? Right? And some people have to make those choices, right? And sometimes, let's be honest, family life is something that's creating some of the problems because they haven't dealt with them. Right? I mean, the amount of guys that I've talked to over the last year, part of it is their environment. You know, and I hate to say this, not that there's no blame to be on anybody for whatever addiction you're going through or that process. It's still on you. But sometimes you have to make the decision to remove yourself from that environment if it's not going to help you get to that place. And by the way, there's a lot of relationships. I can tell you that if Wendy wouldn't have gone to therapy and done intense coaching because she was trying to figure out who she was, we both lost our identities. We lost it together, we lost it apart, and we were like way over here trying to figure out who the hell each of us was. Because we both took responsibility for all the things that had happened, we worked on each other by ourselves, right? Like, I wasn't forcing her to do things, she's not forcing. We were just working on it, walking down the same road on separate sides of the street.
Yeah.
Until we could come back to the middle once we figured out who we were. And in that 30 days was me looking at, who am I going to become after this? And what is it going to look like? To where I think most people go in with the mindset of, what's this going to look like and how miserable is this going to be when I come out of it? Because no longer can I have the same life that I did.
So what was it like when the gate closed behind you and here you are, day one, you're out.
I'm here.
You're
home.
You're back home, and it's going, I've found the catalyst that's going to drive and the journey into self-discovery. But now it's really just on you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what has it been like to step more and more into the clarity of your identity, of who it is you want to be as Steve D. Valentine, just the man, the husband, the father, like long before you get to be a real estate professional, strategist, entrepreneur, all things,
all the crazy.
And we're intentionally filming this here at your house, right? Because this is your place. This is where you get to be you. So what was that journey like, that first week home, going, all right, I got to live in rhythm. I got to do the things I know that I've been doing that are helping me find this clarity. But what was that clarity you found the first week home?
Well, it's interesting because we sit in the same spot where I spent a lot of quiet time when I came home, right? Because it was November and we're in November. I just got out, 20 days ago, a year ago. And there was a lot of living in the pause. There was a lot of realizing that I've been here before, where I had quit for 18 months. And I talked about it all the time during that 18 months. 100 days, 90 days, look at me, all the things. Problem with that time is I never did any internal work. I white knuckled it, right? I wasn't looking for the life without it. I was still missing it, going and hanging on to it, like being deprived.
And how does that flush out, right? So when you say white knuckle it, you mean like, were you just counting on that day 119 sober? Like, are you counting on the public accountability? Like, in what ways do you white knuckle it? Like, are you like just hoping that I don't blow this?
So white knuckle it was, God, what was it, 2019? It was probably a Wednesday afternoon, and I was blackout drunk, right? And I remember waking up, and my wife was pissed at me. She was in the other room, and the next day we sat down, and she's like, you need to go to rehab, get some help. And I'm like, oh yeah, fuck you, I got this under control. And I just stopped drinking. And that first 30 days was really hard because I was just like in it, trying to figure it out. And then it got a little bit easier, but that was the only focus, right? And I now understand where people, in AA and those things are like one day at a time. And it's like, it becomes the sole focus of living is to be sober. In that white knuckle time, I didn't go into AA meetings. I didn't go for anywhere for support. I didn't do any therapy. I was just not drinking, right?
Living your daily life.
Living my daily life.
Gotcha.
Wasn't getting any better from it. So now I'm trying to remember where we were before that. Sidetrack.
Well, the first week home, right?
Yeah, the first week home was just realizing that I was becoming somebody different. And the only way it was going to happen was to live by example. Not talk about it, not write about it. One of the biggest impacts when I got home was seeing a Tony Robbins video, which I absolutely loved. And it really, I stopped that day, right? I stopped counting days. I stopped giving a shit. I know what my decision day was. It's not my sobriety date. It's my decision date. and it was 10/2/23. That was the day that I made the decision. That was actually the last day I drank, and that was a decision. And the decision starts out to be sober or to get in control. And then after rehab, it's the how do I stay sober? What I've realized in the last year is the third question that most people don't go to, which is how do I get free? So as I sat, it took me probably until March to really get comfortable and get out of my shame and guilt of having to go to rehab and start questioning. It's amazing where people will stand up and cheer for people when they decide to go on this crazy, amazing adventure of getting healthy and getting skinny and going to fat camp and all the things, or whatever those pieces are that you change. But then the world itself, when you make a decision to say, hey, I'm having this problem, I need to go get help for it, it's an instant flaw that comes with shame and guilt rather than a high five, good for you, that's awesome. Now, that's the perception. The reality is, when you do finally go to people and talk to them about it, they are ridiculously proud of you. They are so grateful that you made the decision to make the changes and get healthy. They can see it in you when you become free in it. And that was, that decision at home was to be very still, to do a lot of listening, to do a lot of writing, and to not force myself back into what caused me to be there in the first place.
November till March.
Yep.
How many mornings would you come out here early and try to discover some mindfulness, right? To look inward and focus and kind of.
The funny thing is, remember the playlist you sent me on the way into rehab?
Yeah.
The first song on that playlist, which is a huge, just motivational, yelling, screaming, motivational thing. And it's interesting because I still listen to that first song every morning. But during that time at rehab, I would take a speaker out to the pool. I'd put it by the pool. And that song is about 4 minutes, or that play is about 4 minutes. And I'd jump in the freaking ice cold pool. Even after rehab, I kept up at 4 a.m. I'd get up, I'd come out, and I'd get in this pool. And I'd play that song, and then I'd just sit in the cold water for 5 minutes. I'd get out, and I'd sit. And I'd just think, where am I going? What does it look like? And I would ask myself a lot of questions because I'm still in the decision-making process. I'm still unsure of where my family is. I'm still unsure of where my business is. The only thing I could control was me. And once you realize that the only thing you can control is you, everything else starts to fall in place.
I feel like this is the first real season of your life where you looked inward so consistently, right? So as we're talking about for people to find freedom, but like that's day one being home was when the work began, right? To that journey to freedom. And I think you still are pretty consistent of all these things. And I think that's key in not to be overlooked, because some people are like, I want to go through the journey and then I want to go back to my normal life.
Here's the best analogy I can give you. As I look at Christian sitting over there behind the camera, at 21, I got married, I had a house, I had a job. What I didn't have was a freaking foundation, right? I had my foundation in Christ. I'd been raised in the church, all the things. That was great. I had a great wife. We were doing all the things. What I wasn't doing is working on the foundation. So we started to build the house before the foundation was solid, right? So there wasn't a workout routine. There wasn't a mindful routine. There wasn't a grateful routine. There wasn't a morning routine. That was all those pieces. What people don't realize that all the gurus talk about is the reality is that's your foundation. That's what keeps you grounded. That's what keeps you from freaking blowing people's text messages up when you're angry. That's what keeps you in check when you're out with friends and you decide that I'm not going to drink that much, or I'm not going to drink at all. And that also keeps you in check of knowing who you actually are, and that your identity doesn't become what you do. And that's really what happened with me, is that I started out, I got into real estate. The market has been all kinds of crazy from the time I got into it, right? Get into it in 99 and it's been up, down, freaking sideways, all the things, and you're constantly adjusting. And sometimes I look back, I mean, for as successful as I've been in the business and all the things that we've accomplished, I'm like, what if? What could it have been? And now I look at things and I'm like, what still can it be? I still have a lot of life to give. And I'm grateful to still be like, still feel a little bit in that pause moment. Not everything is there,
Yeah.
but the clarity of what I learned in myself and to be still in the mornings is really what's changed a lot of things.
I feel like, gosh, time goes by really, really fast, but I don't remember if it was a couple months ago or whatever. I feel like there was a few days where you noticed you were starting to hit a lull in your workout routine, right? But you paused.
Yep.
And you identified it.
Yep.
And you had to adjust. And you noticed how when that happened, you could see like the instant take on like mindset. So just unpack that for a minute for me.
Well, you learn, when I went through that process at Soberman's, I learned to be very, very self-aware. Before I was not. How am I feeling? What does it look like? Am I feeling anxiety? Why am I feeling anxiety? What do I need to take off my plate? What's creating the anxiety? As I watch my progression in my health journey, I realized I'm like, okay, I've been doing great on my own for the last year. I've made a lot of significant changes. I've done really well, but I also feel a little stagnant, like I need to be pushed a little bit. So now I'm looking at like, do I need to change my routine? Do I need to change my eating? Do I need to get a trainer for the next level push, right? And so the self-awareness piece is big in anything and everything that you're doing, because it allows you to be self-aware when you're with somebody, some of the feelings, some of the interactions.
Yeah.
Why is it making me feel that way? Why is this person irritating me? And by the way, the self-awareness piece when I was there was about asking myself the question going forward. What brings me joy? Who do I want to be and where am I going? And what do I need to get rid of that's not bringing me joy? That went for people and things.
Yeah.
Right? And, you know, it actually is really sad. I was thinking about this week. You know, I had a really good friend, and I say I had because that friendship is no more, and nor will it be. 20 years ago, we took care of his family, his kids, his bills, while he went to rehab in Malibu and all the things.
Yeah.
And he came back. He had lost his license, his real estate license. My dad was sick, and we were talking about wholesaling, and I taught him how to wholesale, whole new career, all the things. And when I got out of rehab, he had 9 months prior, he had come back to work with me. And what I realized in rehab is that I can only support you, I cannot save you. And before rehab, I was running around trying to save everybody.
Yeah.
So he would come in, he was hurting, and be like, oh, dude, we can do this, we can do this. And I'd try to pull him in and save him, but the reality, there wasn't an equal exchange of energy. So when I got back, that was the first person. I'm like, hey, just so you know, like, the tension, the things, the obligation, the resentment, I can't do it. I love you. I wish you the best of luck. I'm sure we can still work together, but I cannot save you from the person you are. You have to do it yourself. I can support you in that journey if you want to be supported and you want to come along for the ride. He didn't want to change. He didn't see that purpose. And here was the biggest hurt, kick in the balls, is when I was in rehab, just like he had been, he didn't go to my wife and go, hey, what can I help with? Is there anything that I can do? I'm trying to drum business up to like keep things going. That wasn't it. You know what you asked Wendy? When's Steve going to be out so we can start talking business so we can get me on track? That relationship had to go.
Yeah.
And it did. And it was a good conversation at the beginning. It turned out terribly afterwards. And it was just a realization of that really needed to go, and I was right.
Yeah. Well, tell me about your expectation of perfection in your own actions, right? Here's what I mean by that is I know that you don't, this isn't your favorite story, but this is one of my favorite stories.
Oh God.
Post rehab. No. It's just the moment in your office when you took that phone call and you totally blew up on that guy, but
I called him back.
Yeah, but tell me the story, because and this is just the reality of people being like, hey man, you might not be perfect, and that's 100% okay. But my favorite part was no one had to pin you to the wall to go, hey, Steve, you screwed up here. Your arm told you.
Yeah. I mean, that is one of the reasons that I tattooed pause, identify, respond with a pause button, so I can physically touch my left arm and go, hey, take a break. Like, we don't need to reset. We just need to pause. And so I get a lot of sales calls with people pitching me shit.
Yeah.
And
with doing no research first.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, when you're in the middle of something, you're like jamming through something. I remember where I was at. I was at a coffee shop in Scottsdale, and I was going through some stuff, and I was knee deep in it, and this call comes, and I answered it. And the guy's like, hey, this is so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. And he's trying to pitch me something that I really know a lot about, and I just let him have it. And I just freaking, and then I hung up on him. Well, he sends me a text back, and he's like, hey, dude, I must have caught you off guard, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, this dude's freaking smart, right? Like, I admired his approach. He's like, oh, that guy, I pissed that guy off. Maybe I can still catch him. I wrote back to him like, dude, I really appreciate this message because I'm writing in my journal. Why did I just bite that guy's head off? I'm like, I apologize. Be happy to get on a call with you. I just don't have time for a lot of bullshit. And most of these calls turn out to be bullshit, but because of your response, be happy to get on the phone with you. It was just a humbleness that I had to be aware of. And, you know, for the longest time, I told people that I was I had to work through my ego.
Hmm.
You know, some of my friends were talking about ego and things like that. I realized that was the wrong word. It wasn't ego, it was arrogance. It was an arrogance of, do you know who I am? Right? It was the arrogance like I was fucking special. And in the industry, and when people would call, you would kind of treat that way.
Mm.
And God, what a dick. Right? And you start to realize, like, I don't want to live. That's not who I am.
Yeah.
That's not who I want to be. That guy in social media can be that way, but dude, that's not my heart. And there was two very impactful lessons that I realized inside rehab that changed everything for me on the outside. One, going to rehab has nothing to do with your addiction, your other things. It actually has to do with where your head and your heart got disconnected. Some point in life, your head and your heart got severed, and alcohol or the addiction has been the new connection between.
Yeah.
And you're covering up whatever that disconnect was. And so as I went through 14 therapy sessions a week, both group and private, I started to realize some things. And there was one day that I'm sitting in the room, we're going through therapy, and he starts talking about the different types of addicts. And you have the clown, which is the one that's always looking for attention. You have the hero. There's a couple of them in there. The hero is always the thing that I go back to. When he started talking about the hero, he's like, heroes typically were the firstborn, which technically I was in my parents' marriage. And you were typically the golden child, which I was, right? I could do wrong, but in comparison to my brother, not. And I was always there to help my mom every time her and my dad separated, which was 3 times during my teenage years. And I was there when my dad died out of the 4 siblings to take care of everything with my mom and all the stuff that my dad left behind. Well, guess what? I did that inside the real estate business. I did it in my family. I was always trying to save. Like, I was running around with a cape on my back playing hero. I'm like, man. Then what would happen is you go home at night and you take everybody's problems with you and you put them in your backpack and you're weighted and you don't know where to clear your head and how to get it out and how to tell people, I can't help you. There's nothing I can do in this instance that I can help you. And I started to realize, and that's where my saying now comes in when I'm working with real estate agents that are coming to my fold is like, look, I can support you, but I can't save you. And the support means that you have to support yourself, and I can support in your actions.
Yeah.
But I can't do the work and save you from this. I can talk to you till I'm blue in the face, which is very similar to rehab. Rehab can support the process, but it's not going to save you. It is not going to be the answer. And I think a lot of people think like, I'm going to go in and I'm going to be fixed, I'm going to be healed. It's not. It's the complete opposite. It's just the beginning of the journey.
Yeah. You know, something I've noticed since you have like really been living publicly about your journey is I don't think we've been able to go somewhere, whether it's an event, a meeting, something, where someone hasn't come up to you and said, "Hey, I'm so inspired," and either they're needing help, they just received help, or they know someone that needs help. And the courage that it took to not just go get help, to then continue the journey, but now to use that pain in a purposeful way is leading to so many conversations I feel like I get to watch you have to help point people in the right direction. So what do you feel like are some of the biggest lessons you've been learning since you have been like, this isn't just something I'm going to bury? Like, yeah, this was my experience, but I don't want the world to know about it. And like, instead you had to make the choice to go, yeah, this is now part of my story, right? And through it, I feel like, I mean, heck, look at this passion project we're sitting talking about right now, right? It's catalysting a whole lot of new ideas, and I feel like opening doors in a whole different direction. So what would you say have been some of the key things that you have learned about living life through that humility versus arrogance and the ability it's brought to help people?
It really goes back to April. And as you start to figure out who you're becoming, you start to realize who else is in the same situation that I was in. Who else is struggling, and how can I use my pain to support somebody in their journey? Again, not saving anybody, but really being able to talk about the pain, talk about the journey. And the minute you start to do that, and the more you do it, the shame and the guilt starts to dissipate. And it wasn't, I remember doing that event in April and leading up to it. And I remember in January having conversations with Carl and Brian and Blake at lunch and saying, we should all speak together and let's do an event called Grit. Because we've all been through different things. And I remember in April preparing for that and going, yep, this is what I'm going to let it out, right? Full on in public in front of 150 people, I'm just going to talk about it. And in that moment, I realized there's probably somebody in this room that is just like me, sitting at that table, that needs to hear this, that needs to know it's okay to pause in life and take care of this and what you need to do. And I went down the road from the heart. And it was so incredibly received from so many people that it became one of my purposes of, even last night I was telling you before we got on this, is like, my vision for this interview is it's me. It's me 2 years ago when I wake up in the middle of the night and start to drink tequila so I could go back to sleep. And then I relentlessly scroll through stuff, watching people's sober journeys and doing things and trying to figure out how to fix it, because I knew how bad it was. I just didn't want to admit it, and I didn't know how to fix it. Giving people permission to start to think about it and that life can be better without it. And then as I started to write about more of it, it started to release all that shame and guilt. And it started to ultimately give me freedom. And it was from a different perspective than I had ever done things before. A lot of times I would take my story and try to utilize it for, real estate or something. Like, how am I going to turn this into profit? I'm like, you know what? I just want to be able to be open and share about it and not be this guilt and shame thing. And it was something that I did, and it happened to me, not for me. And is 100% part of my story. And now I know the people, the question that you asked, right? The people, being able to help navigate people at least to certain things and through certain things and give them permission has been so amazing. But I think the even more amazing thing is because I have been willing to talk about it and share it and go through it and answer the hard questions, my whole family gets to talk about it. So when I get the call from a real estate agent and it's, her husband's struggling with alcohol, she doesn't know what to do, I can talk her through some things. being able to tap Wendy in and go, hey, she needs to understand your voice and how you led here. And so Wendy's had probably 5 spousal conversations with people that are in her position, not in my position.
Yeah.
So when your wife is willing to also have the conversation from what it looks like on the other side, it's a pretty powerful conversation when you can go back and forth from that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. What do you feel like, as we kind of start to wrap this conversation up, would be some of the most encouraging things you would say to listeners, right? Whether they're family members of, or someone who's going, dang, I wish I had 50 grand to go get help, right? Because it's probably not necessarily just about a location or a dollar spent as much as the drive and willingness to save yourself. So what type of inspiration do you think, or what encouraging word would you say to someone who's needs to cross that threshold and instead has been giving themselves excuses or justifying why they haven't gotten help yet? What would you say needs to be a catalyst to Spartan kick yourself to go get help?
The catalyst isn't going to rehab, and the catalyst isn't the amount of money that's holding you back. It's the same thing I tell real estate agents all the time. If you want something bad enough, you will figure it out, right? You will borrow the money, you will figure out how to finance it, you'll do an equity line, whatever that is. It really starts with figuring out why your head and your heart are disconnected, and realizing, like, either I need help in that area or from somebody, or I need to make a decision to go seek help and start having conversations about it and stop being embarrassed by it. It's the one piece that I can tell you that is acritical. If you're having a problem with it, you need to talk to somebody about it, but find somebody that's not going to judge you for it. Because that is the hardest part in that scenario, is telling anybody, I think I have an alcohol problem. And of course, everybody has an answer for your alcohol problem. Go to an AA meeting, go to rehab, get a sponsor, do the 12 steps. We've heard all that. The reality is that rehab is not that. It's actually finding the things that are going to, finding the pieces in life that bring you joy and focusing on those pieces and figuring out that, hey, if I get really healthy, that's going to keep me on track. If I'm having a really good relationship with my wife and kids, that's going to keep me on track. Because now life is about the new pieces and the new experiences without alcohol and the new people without it. By the way, you can still be around it. Eventually, you're going to be free from it. That's more of the journey and finding those friends and those people that you can have those true conversations with. Because, by the way, if you're thinking it, people already freaking know it. They already know it. Yeah. It's not in hiding. You're already
typically
screwed.
Everybody else is more aware of you than you are.
100%, right? Even though we think we're hiding and all those pieces, it's really about, you can start to have the same journey that I did, which was 3 weeks before I went to rehab, starting to discover and realize, like, life is going to be worse if I don't get this under control. And it's not about control. It's about truly wanting a change and a peace in your life, not about going to another prison. And I think a lot of people, when they start down that road, it's imprisonment. And it goes from, hey, I need to get sober. Not always the want, right? It's the I need, rather than I get to choose to be sober.
Yeah.
And then you get to choose to stay sober in whatever insulin you create, right? So for mine, it's around health, it's around good relationships, it's all the pieces. And eventually, we have to look at where we become free from our past. It will always be part of our story, but it does not have to be our identity. And that is probably one of the biggest things that for people to understand in this journey, is that once you become sober and you make a decision to stop using or drinking or whatever the issue is, the goal is to eventually be free from it, not to trade one prison for the next. And this is my journey, right? Is, I was in prison and alcohol, and that's where it kept me. It was holding me back. I got sober. which was awesome. And I got to go through rehab and I got to spend some time going through the process. And what I realized is I needed to keep going so that I could eventually be free from the shame and this guilt of this is who I was, but this is no longer my identity. I don't identify as a sober person. I identify as a person that's healthy, that doesn't drink, that has a different form of life and a different way that I want to go. And you can absolutely have that too. And I know that there's going to be a ton of arguments to that piece, but I also know that a lot of the guys that I've been talking with that have come through rehab are 3 years sober, and it is still 100% their identity that I'm sober. They feel like they're still hiding. They still like, well, if I tell somebody that I'm sober, then it could impact my job.
Yeah.
And I'm like, when are you just going to stand up and go, I don't drink? Why does it have to be a judgment call if you don't drink versus if you do drink? And so it's been an interesting journey from that path of figuring out, like, where does true freedom come from it to where you never look back. And it's like, yeah, it was there, but I don't go to the bar and I don't go to meetings and I go to bars, right? I don't drink, but I also don't tell people, like, why aren't you drinking? Oh, I'm sober. I'm like, I just don't drink. Right?
Yeah.
The proof is in my face and in my health that I probably don't drink.
Yeah.
Right? Actually,
can we insert a side-by-side photo right there?
Right. I think I'd rather wrap this up in this way. So I think it's important. You asked a lot of great questions, but I think here's the important part as we start this journey. How did my journey impact you? Because what you don't know for the audience is that I always call my brother, our siblings are married to each other, and Garret has been with me for 3 years. So he's seen me at my worst. He's been here for every September that has gone awry, and he's still here, which is amazing that I have that support in my life. So where did this journey impact you and in this space?
Yeah, man. It's interesting because, especially like, let's say that October when you went to rehab, we had several conversations around in the office of being like, okay, what's the plan? But in the back of our head, there's this moment of like, could our journey like all end here if Steve doesn't make it through to the other side? Which is the fear, right? Of being like,
yeah.
Do we need a backup business plan? Do we all need backup jobs? Do we all need there's just...
You went and got an LO license while I was, on vacation.
I got kids to feed, man. And it is, so it's that fear. It's like, hopefully you come out swinging, and that's the hope. You hope for the best and plan for the worst.
Yep.
And have been so excited for this past 14 months, I think, because I think that's kept me probably closer to you than ever, although we laughed a ton, probably got into too much trouble in the first couple of years.
Because I was always the instigator.
Yeah. But I love the journey of self-discovery, of self-growth, of self-leadership, of mindfulness, of all of that holistic approach of what does it look like to try to aim for the best version of me. And I feel like for this past year, I feel like you really have tapped into that, which has synced us on a whole different level of futuristic looking, right? Looking on a futuristic site, dreaming, I guess you
Right.
could say, which is, again, led us on this path that we're on right now. And it changed the way that I feel like we were even having conversations, jumping into, other podcasts that we were having conversations. Because I do feel like it helped us connect on a whole different level of transparency and not just reality, but realness. And I think that was very encouraging for me to have such a, I guess, person who's, a little bit ahead of me in life. And your kids are older than my kids. Your marriage is further along than my marriage. Your retirement planning is beyond mine. Like, you're just a further ahead of me in life. But I feel like it's been fun to watch you catch up on the self-discovery part. And I feel like we've been able to bounce back and forth and be such a good balance and team.
Yeah.
That to have you really become the healthiest version of you, I've just really thoroughly enjoyed. So I think that's why I told you I keep sticking around, because it's very refreshing to me, and I feel like it helps make it easy to pave the way, even though there's so much that we're trying to pioneer, which is always crazy, right? You feel we described it the other day as like a machete in the woods. It's easier when you can just drive down the road and everything in life is smooth.
Right.
And we often feel crazy, but that is the pioneer lifestyle. When you're trying to pave a way for everybody that's behind, it's been a life saying of mine to look ahead for those who follow behind.
Sure.
And part of when you live with this mentality is to make life easier for everybody else behind you. And that's part of creating. That's part of entrepreneuring. It's part of pioneering, is that mindset. So I think to have you functioning at your clearest makes me fire on more cylinders, if that makes sense. So
it's only because there's more crazy coming out of my head now.
Yeah, it's a lot more to juggle, but it's good, and it's positive,
Yep.
you know. Yeah, so I think for me, I'm excited. I'm excited about this project. I'm excited the fact that we have some awesome freaking guests lined up for these
Yep.
conversations,
Yep.
and I think I'm excited for the conversations that are going to start from just even these episodes, right? And we talk all the time about probably what fuels my soul the most, and it is conversations like this. It's journeying with people. It's watching people, find a better source of life, and whether it's healing for their family or themselves, or become a better version of themselves, I think just brings me life, and that's who I want to be in life, is helping people. And I think you sent me a text yesterday, right, about servant leadership and something you were reading.
Yeah.
And it's such a good perspective to have, and it's life when the balance of living life for the convenience of others. It's not just putting myself first and all my wants, but how can I help make life so much better for all these other people, with the balance of making sure my family is good and healthy and taken care of. And it's just this wave you can ride that brings so much joy and fulfillment, that I think for me equates to a great definition of success that I get to enjoy every day. I mean, bro, right now we're in November and it is sunny as can be outside. And I know all of my friends in the Midwest, it's probably already dark, even though it's like 10 in the morning. It's already nighttime there, So for me, it's fun. I'm enjoying this season of life so much. So I am so grateful that you have made the choices you have made, that your family has fought alongside of you every step of the way to remain. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't until after all of this. It was 7-8 months after you went into rehab. Your oldest boy, Christian, who's behind this camera, came onto the team, is working alongside of us.
Yep.
And it's living life with a different level of transparency, which I love, because I think, it's as people will discover if they don't know, but I was in ministry for 20 years, and I live my life knowing that like sin hides in the darkness, and I don't want to be there. So I love living life in the light, because you just can't hide stuff in the light. And
100%.
And I don't want to hide stuff in life, because it just equates to badness,
Yeah.
And I don't want that in my marriage, my family, my friendships, my anything. So I very much love that this has come to be what it is now.
Yeah, it's been an awesome journey, and I'm enjoying this. And the biggest part for me, after you said all that, is just look, supporting somebody that's going through a struggle rather than bailing on them is really going to depend on their character and integrity and what you believe in that person as to whether or not they can go further, or you can help them through it or support them through it. I hate the word help, right? Help sounds so needy and victim. The support thing is really where it comes from. And I am fortunate to my entire staff, my team, my kids, my family, my wife, and my clients. Nobody has disowned me through all of my mistakes. And I think the reality of that is that my heart has always been in good intention, and I've made some mistakes and I've made some errors in my life. And as we go through this, the goal is to really be transparent and show all the different possibilities through this journey, because I can't wait for you guys to see interviews with my wife, with my team, like just to see where all of this goes and the impact it can truly make when you make these transformational, I almost said transition, that's not the right word.
Steve, transitioning.
These transformations at the end of the day. So I'm really excited for where we're going and where we're heading with this. And look, as we wrap this up, we would really appreciate the shares, the subscribes, join the conversation below, how it impacted you, whatever you took away from this episode, and share it with the world for us so that we can make a greater impact on the next human being that might be a struggling father or mother who has kids, who has a business, that might be on the verge of burning something down. And how do they burn it down correctly and then build it back up?